in front of my entire family. My stepmother handed me a Christmas gift, a brochure for a life coach. She smiled that perfect, icy smile and said she just wanted me to reach my potential. In that moment of absolute public humiliation, I didn't cry. I just got an idea. A wonderfully terrible, botanical idea. My name is Sloane. I'm 28 years old, and I need to get something off my chest before we begin. I am tired of people telling us that living well is the best revenge. It's a beautiful sentiment. It sounds great on a coffee mug. But you know what? Sometimes it's a lie. Sometimes living well just means you're quietly suffering while the person who hurt you gets to continue their life. Completely unaccountable. Feeling powerful because they got away with it. They don't learn a lesson. They just learn that their cruelty has no consequences. No. Sometimes the only thing that teaches a bully a real lesson is a sharp, personal taste of their own medicine. So, if you're here for a wholesome story about forgiveness and taking the high road, this might not be for you. This is the story of how my stepmother, the perfect suburban queen, pushed me to my absolute limit. It's about the years of quiet digs, the public humiliations disguised as caring advice, and the moment I realized that being the bigger person was just allowing myself to be made smaller. This is not just another one of those simple family revenge stories. It's a story about what happens when the high road leads you straight off a cliff, and you have to learn to claw your way back up. On your own terms. It's about what I did when I finally decided to stop turning the other cheek and start gardening. If you have ever been told to just be the bigger person while someone was actively trying to tear you down, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let the algorithm know that stories about finally fighting back matter. 2. To understand my little gardening project, you first have to understand the soil it grew from. Welcome to my personal gilded cage. Plano, Texas. It's one of those meticulously planned suburbs where the lawns are cut with geometric precision. The HOA Homeowners Association rules are treated like scripture, and every social gathering feels like a low-key audition for the perfect family award. It's a world that runs on sparkling countertops, spotless SUVs, and the silent, crushing pressure to maintain appearances at all costs, and the undisputed queen of this beige-colored kingdom, my stepmother, Cynthia. To the outside world, Cynthia was a masterpiece of suburban perfection. Her home was immaculate, her charity work was legendary, and her smile was as bright and as hard as a diamond. And my dad, Gary, he just wanted a quiet life. He loved her ambition, mistaking her obsession with control for strength. He just wanted to watch football on Sundays and not have to deal with any conflict. Then there was me, the 28-year-old artistic stepdaughter who worked at a coffee shop to pay the bills while trying to sell my art online. I was the smudge on her pristine family portrait. I was the living, breathing reminder that her new life wasn't a clean slate, but a renovation built over a past she couldn't erase, the past that included my real mother. And for that, I don't think she ever truly forgave me. If you've ever felt like the one messy piece in a family that's obsessed with looking perfect, let me know by typing your zodiac sign in the comments. I just have a feeling a lot of us creative souls share that same battlefield. Cynthia's cruelty wasn't loud or obvious. It wasn't something you could easily point to and say, "See, she's a monster." Oh no, she was far too clever for that. Hers was a death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one delivered with a perfectly manicured smile and the sickening veneer of concern. At family barbecues, surrounded by her friends from the country club, she would put her arm around me and say, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Sloane, honey, are you still working at that little coffee shop? It's just so quaint. I admire you for being so content with the simple things." It sounded like a compliment, but we all knew what it was. A public announcement of my failure to meet her standards. She would corner me at Thanksgiving, holding a glass of Chardonnay, and offer, "You know, my friend's daughter just finished a wonderful course on personal branding. Maybe I could pay for you to take it, just to help you find your direction." Every comment was a carefully crafted performance designed to paint me as a lost, unambitious child and her as the patient, benevolent saint trying to guide me. She would critique my clothes, my hair, my art, always framing it as constructive criticism from someone who just wants the best for you. She was a master of psychological warfare, making me feel small and inadequate, while simultaneously making herself look like the most caring stepmother in the world. To everyone else, she was a pillar of the community. To me, she was the architect of a slow, soul-crushing humiliation, and my silence in the face of it was her favorite source of entertainment. She didn't just want to control me, she wanted me to believe her version of me was the truth. After one particularly brutal Thanksgiving, where Cynthia had spent the better part of the dinner dissecting my lack of ambition for the entertainment of her friends, I finally hit my limit. I couldn't swallow my pain along with the dry turkey any longer. Later that evening, I found my dad, Gary, in his garage, his sanctuary, filled with the smell of sawdust and old tools. This was the one place her influence hadn't fully penetrated. My voice was shaking as I laid it all out for him. Not just the feelings, but the cold, hard examples, the public offers to fix me, the backhanded compliments, the constant erosion of my self-worth. I looked at him, my own father, and said, "Dad, I'm drowning. The way she talks to me isn't a misunderstanding. It's deliberate. Can you please? Please just ask her to stop." He put down the wrench he was holding and let out a long, weary sigh, the sigh of a man who would do anything to avoid a difficult conversation. He wouldn't even look at me. He just stared at his workbench and delivered the words that shattered what was left of my hope. "Sloan," he started, his voice placating. "You know Cynthia. That's just her way. She's intense, but she means well. Don't you think you're being just a little too sensitive?" Too sensitive. In 3 words. He didn't just dismiss my pain, he invalidated it. He chose her comfort over my reality. He chose the path of least resistance, even if that path was paved over his own daughter's heart. I wasn't just fighting her anymore. I was fighting the ghost of the man my father used to be. To have the one person who is supposed to be your defender tell you that your wounds are just an overreaction, that's a silence that deafens you. If you've ever had to learn to be your own hero because the person who was supposed to save you wouldn't even acknowledge the battle, type "my own hero" in the comments. It's a lonely club, but we're all in it together. After my dad's dismissal, I went numb. I decided to just survive the holidays. I would be a ghost at the annual family Christmas Eve party, smiling politely and counting the minutes until I could leave. The house was a winter wonderland, smelling of pine needles and simmering cider. For a moment, surrounded by the festive decorations, I let myself believe it would be okay. Then came the gift exchange. Cynthia, with a theatrical flourish, handed me a large, beautifully wrapped box. "This one is very special, Sloan," she said, making sure everyone was watching. I opened it. It wasn't a sweater or a piece of jewelry. It was a thick binder, the cover emblazoned with the logo for a life realization and career coaching seminar. Tucked inside the front pocket was a check for $500, already made out to the seminar company. "I just want to see you finally live up to your incredible potential, sweetie," she announced to the silent room. It was masterful, a gift of pure disdain, wrapped in the packaging of generosity. It was a public execution of my self-worth. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a toxic mix of shame and rage. I mumbled a thank you, my throat tight, and excused myself to the back patio, pretending I needed some fresh air. As I stood there in the cold Texas night, my body trembling, my eyes landed on her prized rose garden, Eiffeldor Mountain Winter. It was perfect. Every bush pruned, every inch mulched. It was her crown jewel, the source of her neighborhood pride, the physical manifestation of her perfect, controlled world. And as I stared at it, a cold, clear, and wonderfully terrible idea began to take root in the barren soil of my heart. She wanted to fix my life. Fine, I would ruin hers. I went home that night with a fire in my veins I hadn't felt in years. The helplessness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. My war wouldn't be fought with words. It would be fought with botany. For the next week, I became a vengeful horticulturalist. I spent hours on my laptop, deep in gardening forums and agricultural websites. I didn't want something that would just kill her roses that was too simple, too quick. I wanted a problem that would grow, that would fester, something she couldn't just pay a landscaper to fix. My research led me to the perfect biological weapon: Japanese knotweed. It's an invasive species so destructive that, in some countries, you can be prosecuted for not controlling it. Its roots can shatter concrete foundations. It is, for all intents and purposes, horticultural cáncer. It was perfect. Next came the planning of a perfect, untraceable crime. I drove 15 miles to a different town and bought a prepaid Visa gift card with cash, using the Wi-Fi at a Starbucks. I created a temporary email address and ordered the seeds from an obscure online supplier in another country. For the shipping address, I used a house in her neighborhood that I knew had just gone up for sale and was vacant. I watched the online tracking like a hawk. And on the day the small, innocent-looking envelope was delivered, I waited until after midnight and retrieved it from the mailbox. I waited for a dark, rainy night, dressed head to toe in black. I slipped into her yard like a ghost. This wasn't angry vandalism, it was a quiet, preciso, surgical strike. And as I scattered those tiny seeds among the roots of her prize-winning roses, I wasn't just planting a weed, I was planting chaos. After my late-night gardening session, I did the hardest part. I let go. I moved on. I focused on my art, my work, and rebuilding my own little world. I let winter pass, and then spring arrived in Plano with its usual cheerful explosion of life. The first update came during a strained phone call with my father. He mentioned, offhandedly, that Cynthia was furious about some incredibly stubborn weed that had taken over one of her prize-winning rose beds. I just hummed a neutral response, a private smile on my face. A few weeks later, the report was more frantic. She'd hired her expensive landscaping team to eradicate it. But it had come back. Stronger, faster. By the time early summer hit, the Japanese knotweed was a full-blown infestation. It was living up to its monstrous reputation. The thick, bamboo-like stalks were choking the life out of her delicate, meticulously cared for roses. The underground rhizomes were spreading like a silent, unstoppable army. I heard she was spending a fortune on specialized treatments and consulting with agricultural experts, but nothing worked. The more she fought it, the more it thrived. Her sanctuary of perfection, the symbol of her suburban superiority, was transforming into an ugly, chaotic jungle. Occasionally, I would drive by the house, from a safe distance, and see her out there in the Texas heat, her face red with fury, yanking at the weeds herself. My revenge wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a slow, creeping, chronic illness for which there was no cure. There's a special kind of justice that you can't force. You just have to plant the seed and wait for it to grow. It's the best kind of show. If you believe that what goes around eventually comes around, just type karma in the comments. Let's see who else here trusts the process. Ruin a garden. And you might ruin someone's summer, but ruin the garden of a woman whose entire social standing is built on being the neighborhood's perfect gardener. You detonate her whole world. And that's exactly what happened. The battleground shifted from her front yard to the community clubhouse during the quarterly HOA meeting. This was Cynthia's turf. Her stage. She was always the one at the podium, calmly discussing the importance of property values and pointing out minor infractions with the precision of a surgeon. But I heard from my dad that this time, she was the one on the agenda. She had received 3 official violation warnings for an unmanaged landscape and proliferation of a noxious weed. The irony was so perfect. So ric. It was almost poetic. The queen was being dethroned in her own court. My dad said she tried to maintain her composure, but when the board president politely suggested she hire a new landscaping service, she snapped. She stood up and launched into a frantic, 10-minute tirade. She accused unnamed, jealous enemies of a coordinated horticultural attack. She sounded less like a respected community leader and more like a conspiracy theorist. Her voice shrill, her hands shaking. People weren't looking at her with respect anymore. They were looking at her with a mixture of pity and alarm. In that single meeting, she had done more damage to her reputation than my weeds could ever do to her lawn. She had publicly unraveled. My little seeds hadn't just choked out her roses, they had choked the very air from her carefully constructed social life. And she was suffocating in front of everyone. Watching her public downfall, you'd think I would have felt nothing but pure, unfiltered triumph. And don't get me wrong, a large part of me did. It was satisfying, but as the weeks went by and the dust settled, another, more complicated feeling began to surface. A strange, sad sense of understanding. One afternoon, I was cleaning out a closet and I found an old photo album. I opened it to a picture of my biological mother, taken years before she passed away. She was standing in the backyard of our house, smiling, holding a bouquet of roses she had just cut. It was the same spot where Cynthia had later ripped everything out to install a sterile, lifeless stone patio. And as I looked at my mother's face, really it all clicked into place with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity. This was never really about my job at the coffee shop. It was never about my art, my clothes, or my lack of ambition. It was about her, my mother. I was the living ghost in Cynthia's perfect house. I had my mother's eyes, her laugh, her creative spirit. Every time my dad looked at me with a flash of pride, Cynthia probably saw him looking at his first love, her relentless need for perfection, the obsessive gardening, the fierce social climbing. It was all a desperate attempt to prove she was better, to erase the memory of the woman who came before her. And her constant attacks on me. That was just her way of trying to tear down my mother's last living legacy. It didn't excuse her cruelty, but it did expose it for what it was. The pathetic, desperate act of a deeply insecure woman, terrified of living in a ghost shadow. It's a strange moment when you finally understand the why behind the person who hurt you. It doesn't erase the pain, but it changes its shape. Have you ever had that flash of insight where you suddenly saw the sad, scared person behind the bully? Let me know with a simple yes or no in the comments. I'm truly curious how many of us have seen behind that curtain. And understanding her why finally helped me understand my own. Why did her specific brand of psychological warfare cut so deep? Why did my reaction feel so necessary? So, Primel, it was because this fight with Cynthia was never just about Cynthia. She was just the final boss in a video game I'd been playing my entire life. In middle school, she was the girl who would mock my thrift store clothes. In my first job, she was the boss who would dismiss my ideas in meetings, only to present them as her own a week later. All my life, I had been taught to deal with these women by being quiet, by being polite, by making myself smaller in the hopes that they would overlook me. And with every passive surrender, I was reinforcing the belief that my feelings didn't matter, that I wasn't worth defending. Cynthia's mistake was pushing that quiet girl too far. When my own father told me my pain wasn't real, something inside me finally snapped. Planting those seeds was about more than just a garden. It was a declaration of existence. For the first time, instead of absorbing the abuse, I was redirecting it. I was fighting back on my own terms secretly, intelligently, and in a way that couldn't be dismissed as me being too sensitive. It was a deeply therapeutic act. It felt like I was reaching back in time to that scared little girl who just wanted to be invisible, and telling her, "It's okay. You can fight back now. I've got you." This wasn't just a story of petty revenge. It was about reclaiming the power that had been chipped away from me, piece by piece, my entire life. It was about telling myself I was finally worth fighting for. But I need to be crystal clear about something. This method, my little project in horticultural warfare, isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not my answer to every person who has ever wronged me. The real lesson here isn't just how to get revenge. It's about having the wisdom to know what kind of revenge a situation calls for. In my professional life, I've had people try to sabotage me, colleagues who tried to steal my clients, and gallery owners who told me I'd never make it as an artist. My revenge on them, it was living well. It was working harder, getting better, and building a career so successful that their opinions became nothing more than irrelevant background noise. My success was the revenge. because it proved them wrong on a scale they couldn't ignore. But Cynthia was different. Her abuse wasn't a professional roadblock. It was a personal, psychological siege. It was happening in my home, from my own family. Living well somewhere else wouldn't have stopped her. She would have just found a way to mock that. 2. That kind of intimate, persistent bullying doesn't respond to the grand revenge of success. It requires a short, sharp shock to the system. It needs a direct consequence. You have to give them a taste of their own medicine to make the behavior stop. The ultimate lesson wasn't simply an eye for an eye. It was learning to be a strategist. You have to diagnose the wound correctly before you choose the medicine. Sometimes, the medicine is your own brilliant success. And sometimes, it's a handful of carefully chosen, invasive, and wonderfully destructive seeds. So, where do things stand now? All this time later, from what I hear, the war against the Japanese knotweed was a complete and utter failure. The garden was declared a lost cause, a permanent, ugly scar on their once perfect property. Cynthia is quieter now. She resigned from the HOA board. Her reign as the queen of the neighborhood is over. My dad and I, we still talk, but there's a new distance between us. An unspoken understanding that something was fundamentally broken and can never be fully repaired. And me, do I regret it? Not for a single, solitary second. I don't feel guilt. I feel a profound sense of peace. The chronic anxiety that used to live in my chest is gone. For the first time, I feel like the main character in my own life, not a supporting role in someone else's toxic drama. People might call what I did petty. They might call it cruel. But I see it differently. I didn't just introduce a weed into a garden. I introduced a dose of uncontrollable reality into a world suffocating from its own artificial perfection. I learned that sometimes, a field is so compacted with old, dead roots that nothing new or healthy can grow. Sometimes, you have to till the soil, turn everything upside down, and create a little chaos to make way for something better. And in a way, that's what I did for myself. I finally found my peace. Not by taking the high road, but by getting my hands dirty. And I sleep very, very well at night. This is just my story, but I know I'm not alone. If you believe that you have the right to defend your own peace, even if it means breaking the rules someone else wrote for you, then hit that subscribe button. Join this community of unapologetic survivors. We have a lot more stories to tell.